possible future lecture, it somehow ended in an issue of freedom, and I thought, well, maybe that'd be a good thing to address, you know, how to be free in this so-called unfree world we live in, how to live peacefully in this world full of turmoil and all kind of activity. And I left it at that. I thought, well, somehow I'll be able to produce, but knowing you as a group now, and I know that, you know, you are spiritual seekers more than just the intellectual sort of types who try to just rehash things, but without any really conclusion, and just see it more like some sort of intellectual game. I decided that I would mix, you know, that whole issue of freedom with some spiritual directions, you know, for everybody, you know, to benefit from, you know, because obviously it's one thing to hear about things, and that's very end, and other thing is to actually be able to perhaps do something, you know, personally, to increase that level of freedom, because freedom is not a product in itself, it's not an entity, it's a byproduct of certain way. And so I want to show how that way can be sort of developed, how one can step on that path and develop these faculties which gives you this awareness of personal, mostly spiritual freedom. As you know me, I always try to start probably from a different end, but eventually end where I want to. And to talk about freedom, obviously, is a very difficult topic, because so much has been said about it. Everybody, seems to me, is using the word freedom these days. It's a high dogma word for politicians. It's a very loaded word. Some people blowing themselves up for freedom. Everybody feels somehow that there is not enough of that freedom. But I thought of it, and I sort of came to a conclusion that we never really analyzed that meaning, what really it means to us. Usually it means, you know, a desire to be able to do whatever we want, to go wherever we want. In some ways, for many, to behave the way we want, and for some others, it might be able to speak or to learn whatever we want. But the freedom is a generic term which covers all kinds of things. Now, as I mentioned many times before, we are really dual beings. You know, we are natural beings and we are spiritual beings. Natural world we live in is a three-dimensional world. And so everything which means three-dimensional means on outside. And so when we look on a freedom from the point of a natural existence, we're talking or we think about the freedom of three-dimensional reality. It's not the freedom of a heart as much as freedom of being able to whatever. Now, when we look on a spiritual man or spiritual being, we're looking within. And that within is of different dimension. For the sake of argument, let's call it fourth dimension. I mean, it's just more than what we see, what we feel, and what we can touch. And this matter of the heart has a different criteria as to what freedom is, how the freedom feels, and what is it good for to us. The latest research in brain, for example, development and a function of a brain indicates that there is a fifth part of the brain, and that's heart. And that brain has a holographic type relationship with the physical brain, we have in our skull. But in some way, it is integral, and most of these things of spirit might be sort of centered in our heart. So this feeling which goes back, about heart, is probably very correct. And if you are not free within, in your heart, you really are not free very much. Even if you think that you are free in a present. Obviously, if you look into different religions and different philosophies, historically you would see that freedom was always in some way constrained within that particular belief or within that particular philosophies. Some people would say, we have never been free, we've been born into slavery and we die in shackles. And the other would say, well, we are free until, things change and we develop our desires and we develop our senses, and then the enslavement comes. Buddhism, for example, speaks about suffering as a main cause, or desire as a main cause of suffering. You cannot be free when you suffer and when you desire. But I don't want to go into philosophies. You can find the books about it and you can debate it intellectually. I want to sort of lead you through some sort of reasoning to feel that maybe the freedom is not as uniform and not being perceived by everybody the same way, and that you cannot sort of describe freedom on a piece of paper and say, there you have it, and just you'll be free. We sometimes feel that we are free, but as time goes, we realize that it was just an illusion, that this perception of freedom was colored by our own inclinations and our own sort of desire. And lots of people do lots of for freedom, and when it really comes to it, they don't suddenly feel that they have achieved that freedom when they get what they've been after. It's just not as powerful and not as clear-cut. I remember when I was a young guy, 24 years, I escaped from Czechoslovakia to Canada in order that I'm free. That I escaped this communist oppression and I escaped all the restrictions which hold me down in whatever I thought I can achieve and do. But when I got to the West, it wasn't as clear-cut as it seems to me when I took this chance and ran across. I realized that people are people wherever they are, and irrespective of dogma or irrespective of philosophy, some would feel free under any type of regime, and some would just feel trapped, irrespective, even if they've been in a paradise. So one had to really readjust one's belief as to what is that freedom. I would say that, you cannot have a freedom without something which has to be present. The freedom gives you options, unlimited options, whatever that might be, whether they are physical, whether they are intellectual, whether they are sort of artistic, creative, but it also requires something from you. And if you don't have that, and you are not prepared to address that, then you would never be able to really be free. And one of these things is responsibility. You cannot be simply free and be irresponsible. You have to basically be accountable, because that's what freedom is. Nobody else would tell you what to do, because that way you've been losing your freedom in some ways, in a personal way. But because you have that freedom, you have to be responsible. Responsible not only to yourself, but also to everybody around you, generally to the mankind, to the planet. Because if everybody was truly behaving like nobody else existed, as so-called totally free, there'd be a chaos, and there'd be probably very quickly a disaster, because impression of what is freedom for one might not be necessarily the same in somebody else's mind. So there is this society, and society somehow would dictate the rules of conduct. And if you follow these rules and you don't break them, then you are free. As the old Greeks were saying, you are a slave of your laws if you are truly free. And, you know, if you don't break any law, if you only do what is so-called allowed, then as far as society is concerned, you are free and you can act within that boundaries. But obviously that's not what individual wants. When I lived in a society which was based on a different system, there was a saying that society is everything and individual is nothing. That your personal freedom, so whatever it is not as important as the freedom of the multitude. And then if it's necessary to take your so-called freedom so the other can be free, then let's do it. And that led into a lots of conflict. Attitudes to freedom also is not something which is constant. As we are growing up, we see war differently. When we are in our childhood or young age, freedom is freedom to play, freedom to do whatever we want, without really very much thought as to, you know, that there is a price to be paid for everything what we're doing and everything what we want and everything what we get. And the world is open. So if I had only the freedom, I would go to such and such a country, I would do this and that. But reality sets in, and eventually we realize that these were just the dreams. It was a sort of more like fantasy. And we never felt really truly free in dreaming these things. And obviously, as one gets older, one realizes that life is shrinking, and that whatever time is left, the freedom which one imagined in that segment of life is probably very different from the type of freedom one was imagining when he was 20, 30 years younger. Now, when we talk about the natural life, I mean, again, three-dimensional life, the life which is normally believed by everybody as the only life. So those who are not spiritually aware, they would not entertain the possibility that there are two individuals mixed together. One is the spiritual, which is in a world of its own, and the other is the natural, which is in a different world. And this inner and outer existence sometimes is so isolated that, you know, one side doesn't know what the other side is doing. When we imagine freedom, traditionally, we imagine the freedom in a natural world. And sometimes people misunderstand freedom for security. You know, they feel that they are free to do whatever they want as long as nothing can happen to them, as long as they have money in the bank, and as long as their child is healthy and the relationship is good and they have a job and all kind of stuff. But the point is that this investment into these symbols, to these sort of things, is satisfactory, and one doesn't think of anything if everything works. So relatively you feel that life is just fine, and that your strength is true, that you are strong in a present and you are also strong in a spiritual, but this is not the case. The moment something goes wrong, like I said, the shares suddenly collapse and the kids turn wrong, you know, relationship flops, house gets on fire and all. Suddenly we are lost. From a strong person who had all this so-called talk about, you know, freedom and this and that, you get somebody who is totally shattered, crying, you know, unable to handle the situation and all. Because it was a sort of an illusion. It was an illusion of being free, while one was really a slave to these things, you know. And as long as the things simply, as I say, fulfill their function, we don't need to bother, and we feel good. We feel sort of, that's how it should be. As long as we have money, we know we are free to travel, we are free to buy things. But when that turns off, suddenly things change. And my approach to freedom is very different, because we live in a world which is increasingly oppressive. The world which is really in many ways unjust. To those who are spiritually inclined, it definitely appears that way. And in that world, it's very difficult to keep one's faith and one's convictions as to what it means to be liberated, you know, to be free. And very frequently people would just cave in and cease to fight or resist and just become part of this huge stream of humanity which is simply carried from somewhere to somewhere, but really there is no any clue what is at the end of it. When we are born, obviously we are not aware of our spiritual aspect, and everything what we're learning is about the world around us. And this world around us has its own influence on us. We think that we make our decisions freely, when we want to eat, when we want to go to the bathroom, when we want to go to sleep, whatever we want to read, and who we meet and all. But when you really analyze it deeper, you realize that pretty well everything we do is in response to something which happened. That we have not really made that free decision without taking into account or being influenced by the external circumstances. And so we don't even realize how quickly and how smoothly we sort of blend into these bonds which truly appear to be invisible, but in reality they are very strong and powerful, and they prevent us from behaving and expressing ourselves in such a way that it will be the most beneficial to our development as a human being and to maximization of all the best which is in us, and to achieve really that what we've been destined to. Because we all, honestly and truly, have much greater capacity within us to realize some incredible potentials than we actually do. People say brain works only on 10%. Well, I would say maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I know that our capacity, what we can do and we can achieve if we are truly free, is probably utilized maybe less than 10%. Because whatever comes to our mind, I believe very strongly, is already a reality, which is happening, waiting to happen, but it just unfortunately never happened because there was no that opportunity, that freedom to realize it was sort of taken away by responsibilities we might have in a natural world we live, or by other emotions, because you have to understand that if you are not a master of something, then the only option is you are a slave of it. And slavery means, you know, that you are not free. And so if you, let's say, cannot control your food intake or what you eat, you know, you are a slave because you can't help yourself. It would always get you into a situation you not necessarily would like to be, but it's inevitable if you do it, whether it's slave to sex, politics, whatever. We basically have to learn that as I said, there is a responsibility. And we have to develop within us sort of very clear awareness that freedom and responsibility truly go together. So you have to be responsible in your actions as well as in your thoughts. And that way you'll be able to bring them under control and you master these things. And once you master these things, they would not come to bug you. They would be there until you activate. And so you have a freedom, you have a peace from that side. You know you won't be tempted. You know that you would not be behaving in a way which might, in some ways, create consequences that would be far more than you've been willing to pay if you understood. Because consequences usually means that something has to be mended, something has to be repaid, something has to be dealt with. And that means that your freedom in some way is not anymore in action, because you have to deal with these things instead of doing something which you feel you might have been doing. So from the beginning, one thing to develop internal strength and internal security is to be aware that that's the true reality. True reality of life is not the external reality. This is all just here for a while. And the body itself is truly not what we are. It's just a container which carries our true selves, which is a spiritual oneself. You know, we are spiritual beings, and that definition of spiritual being is so different from the natural being that we cannot even compare it, because, as I've said, we talk about different dimensions. It's only when you become on spiritual wavelengths you would feel the difference. When you talk to those who are already on the other side, and one of the great books which deals with this issue of awareness, spiritual awareness, is called Unobstructed Universe by Stuart Edward White. The book is easily available still as a second-hand book, and there was a number of reprints, and I'm sure that if you want to read it, you know, you would be able to find it with very little difficulties. But this is one of the clearest description of one spiritual essence and what it means to live in a spiritual dimension. One of the things, you know, people say, well, when I die it's all over and that's it, you know, I'll be free and all, but frankly that's not the case. You know, many people after they die, they are still not free. They're hanging still to the dwellings they have used to live, and it holds them like a shackle. They still are tied up in unresolved issues, and because of not the clarity of conscience, you know, they suffer. So the fact that you have lost your body have not changed very much on your perception as to who you are and what is this so-called freedom. But freedom is not a nirvana. Freedom is not just being there and doing nothing and somehow singing religious tunes or whatever. The freedom is, like I said, a byproduct, like peace, for example. Peace itself does not exist. I cannot give you a peace. I can give you hints of way how to live. So if you live that way, you might feel peace, and you would therefore live peacefully. When we talk about freedom, I can say, well, I cannot say, well, I'll give you the freedom. I give you the money and you're free. Well, you won't be free. You discover very quickly that you have other level of slavery, and the freedom is far from being sort of what you imagine. But I can tell you how to live your life and how to conduct yourself, that this something which we call freedom start to come forth to your consciousness, and you start to feel the incredible potential, the unlimited opportunities in that divine concept. And that's the freedom. But it's a different freedom from the freedom most of the people imagine. Freedom doesn't cost very much. Freedom is very cheap, especially when you compare that freedom to security. Now everybody is talking about security, but you know, security erodes freedom. Every time there is new measure to make you safe, you have to pay some price for that measure. And that price usually is far greater than what you're getting in return. And so, because security is like a heavy blanket, it takes your energy, it zaps your imagination, destroys your creativity. You just sort of changing from a being who had a tremendous potential of expression in so many ways, because we do all have that potential of expression, to a being who just exists and hope that nothing happened to him. And obviously politicians and anybody who seek power know that the biggest enemy of power seekers is the freedom of individual. And the greatest supporter or whatever of what they are trying to do would be talk about security. Because most of people get frightened because they just don't know. And because they get frightened, they are ready to give away so easily that which is virtually impossible to get back afterwards. And you lose even taste of it, you know. Once you are enslaved for long enough, you might not even try to get out of the prison or the cage you've been in, and you feel that's good enough. You get used to it. So I don't want to be high and mighty and bring some lofty proverbs or statements on freedom, which means very little. The freedom has to come from within, and if it doesn't come from within, then it can be only talk about from without, from outside. But this is not a true freedom. Freedom which somebody can give you and somebody can take you is really not the freedom we expect. The freedom we're talking about is spiritual. And therefore, if you are free in your heart, because I've said that heart is a really sort of a holographic part of our mind or our brain, and it's probably a seed of spiritual awareness. When we talk about freedom of our heart, we mean a total liberation, and we not even concern with the so-called natural man, natural being. You can be in a prison, you can be so restrained that you cannot do anything, but you can be still extremely free. And it would not even bother you, you know, what else is happening to you. Your freedom is internal. There is a book by Jack London. I wish I knew, I'll get that name, about a guy who was one of the gang of 29 in early 1900 or early in the 20th century. There was this bunch of robbers, and they called themselves Gang of 29. I guess it was 29 of them or something. And eventually, they've been all caught, and most of them been executed. But there was a one, I'll get his name, who got lifetime. And he was put into a jail which was known for its cruelty. The jail from which nobody ever walked alive. The wardens were the most despicable creatures who loved to torture and enjoyed sort of suffering. And there were certain degrees of punishment these people would get there if they misbehaved certain way. And this particular guy was put through the whole gamut of whatever they had at their disposal. Normally, there was nobody on record who survived even half of the tortures he had to actually endure. And he would be locked in this restraining jacket, which was full of pins and sharp objects and whatever, and any movement, any little things would just puncture your skin, irritate you, you'd be bleeding, you'd be insane. And there'd be nobody who can stay in it for half an hour. This guy was able to be there for days. And when they finally let him go in total disbelief, he was just quite happy, and there was no any indication of insanity and all. He endured absolutely everything. So he became a big hero. And because of this incredible endurance, he was actually pardoned by the governor of states there where he lived. And he became one of the greatest reformers in prisons in the U.S. history. I forgot his name, but I'll give it to you next time. Or if you email to Neil, I'll give him the info. And you can actually order the book. It's still printed. It took me some doing before I was able to actually put a hand on it. But this is something, you know, that this guy have developed a technique of inward immersion to his soul or to his heart, where he completely escaped the physical existence. And so the body might be tortured, but body was not alive. He felt absolutely nothing. In the contrary, he was in a very free world, but it was only brought about by this incredible difference between the natural and spiritual nature of his, and that's true with all of us. He was basically able to escape this worst possible case of restrainment and freedom erosion, and still in his heart he was freer than ever, because prior to that he never felt his freedom. He was a robber, and he was a truly rather despicable being. He killed some people and all. It's only when he was exposed to this incredible contrast that he was able to actually develop this side of his. It's a first case of so-called out-of-body experiences, they call it, or some way of deep meditation where you can completely block the reality consciously and live in that reality probably for indefinite period of time, because as long as he was tortured, as long as he was trapped, he just was in a different world. So what I'm saying is that we do have a capacity within us to liberate ourselves from the feeling of being not free. We can escape always to our inner self, which is a true us, and try to live in that world while we're living in this world, you know. So we have not necessarily sort of a situation that because we are living in a natural world and we are natural being, we can only deal with so-called natural freedom. As I've said, natural freedom is not a true freedom. It's only agreed upon type set of criteria, which if somehow you feel you have them, you are free, or you should feel free. It's like if somebody says, well, you should laugh now because it's funny, you know. I mean, everything has its own ways of judging. And one way to maintain free, you have to make sure that there are no restraints put on your existence, either physically, mentally, or spiritually. Sometimes you cannot help it, but it doesn't mean that you might be in prison. Look on Helen Keller. Helen Keller, as you know the story, was a lady totally blind, totally mute since birth, and everybody thought that she was basically just finished, but she had that incredible spirit within her. And when they managed to communicate through her, she brought herself forth as the most inspiring human being, who was much more free in its infirmity than anybody around her. And she inspired hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people. The greatest thinkers of 20th century have been moved by Helen Kell's existence. So the freedom is not necessarily physically being unleashed, and in the contrary, you know, sometimes the internal freedom comes about as a result of a physical constraint. You get lots of people who thought they are very free and do all kinds of things, and they get injured in doing these things, for example, in a sport. And then being confined as a paraplegic and all, something inside starts to work. And instead of being depressed and feel unfree, they realize that they are truly free at that condition. And that before, when they've been fully mobile and active, it was just an illusion. So I'm saying, you know, that this line between spiritual and physical is a very sort of smooth transition. And that you, while you are living now, can move between these two extremes, you know, and that you can develop a process of escape to within, and the whole world, which is so hectic, so in a hurry, so unfair and oppressive sometimes, would go away, and you would feel yourself fully in your true essence, because somehow, just think about it, you can get only tired physically. You can get only tired with things which relates to this three-dimensional world. But as far as spiritual, as far as your mind goes, you never get tired, you know. You can be tired, but you can be very active in your mind. You can still feel fresh and strong and all, because that thing is not subject to the same laws which it is when you are just purely natural. So when I'm listening what's happening now, and I can see that when you don't feel free, even if you do not understand how free is to feel, when you feel you are not free, you feel that your life is not fully unfolding. You feel that you have no opportunity nor a chance, perhaps, to be what you want to be and to do what you would like to do. You feel that society is demanding from you too much, that you are sacrificing your precious time, and every day which is gone is day which will never come again. And as you are moving towards your older part of life, you realize that everything is moving faster, and that, you know, it's like that, you know, sun clock, you know, you just know that suddenly, you know, everything moves faster. It's called quickening, you know, and egg timer, you know, you can see how at the end, you know, the grain of sand just drop, you know, and before it's all slow. So I feel that we go through a process of life where at certain point we start feeling the quickening of life. Things just simply go faster somehow. And we are trapped because we have not done so much. And we felt that we don't have a freedom to do because we have so many responsibilities and so much is demanded, expected of us. And that we basically sacrificing our lives for something which might not necessarily be what we, in our belief, eventually would come to conclusion was right or it was that urgent. Lots of people fought in wars, fought for causes. Always freedom is somehow part of it, you know. And when it is all over, how many of them really feel that it was worth it, you know? Very frequently you realize that you've been manipulated by somebody else, that you serve other purpose, and that purpose was not necessarily clear to you or was told to you at that time. And if you only knew, you would have not get involved and all that stuff. So we are, as a human being, we are essentially good people. And our freedom is very simple freedom. We want to live and let others live. We don't want sort of things to burden us. We don't want to feel pain or suffering. We want to be basically free in a sense. Then we do not feel anything physical. Because when you are not physically feeling, you feel free. If you are healthy and you don't feel any pain and ache in your body, you don't even know you have a body. You just somehow do things, life goes on, things going. Only when you get pain, suddenly you realize that you are all legs or arms or whatever, and any thoughts, everything comes to that part which aches you. And so we have to realize that this is also true on mental level. You know, if nothing bugs you mentally, you have no debts, you have no problems and all, your mind is tabula rasa, it's clean, and you feel free, opportunities. Yeah. But if something bugs you, your family stuff, work, you have certain insecurities, doesn't matter what else is happening, this would be so powerful that it would prevent you from being free. Now, the point is that to be in harmony, to be so-called fully awake, you know, you have to develop yourself at all levels. You have to have a good body. It's a part of the freedom, if you can help it, to have a good body. You can have it by taking care of it a little bit better. Because if you do not, you get diabetes, you might get all kind of other illness, and you realize that your freedom is very curtailed, you know. What you can do, what you can travel, where you can travel, what you can eat, and whatever other things. Joy of life is definitely undermined. So the body is prerequisite. So you have to say, okay, I'm either slave to my body, or I'm a master of my body. To be a master, you have to develop an awareness that you are the master, and the body is just something you use. Body just serves you. And to do so, you cannot just say it, and because we are so blended together that these are just the concepts. Until you really feel it, you won't believe it. But you can develop it by being aware of your body. You can do it as a little exercise. Every day you stretch your arm, and you would say to yourself, I'm stretching my arm, not I'm stretching arm. Because if you say I'm stretching arm, means it's part of you. You have to disassociate. You have to say, I'm stretching my arm. My head is aching. I am walking, my leg goes, and you just develop awareness of the body. You know, instead of automatically doing things, you put your mind and observe your behavior as what body is doing. You are the observer, and the body is executing these steps or whatever behavior. And eventually you would get it into you so much that you would develop control over your body. And when you develop that control over your body, you increase your awareness of body is doing, or what body is doing at any time. And so you'll be much better to capture anything which is going out of sync. If something goes wrong with the body, because you have that awareness, you would notice much quicker that something is going wrong, and you can do a better job on fixing it. Because you become a master rather than a slave, you can command the body to behave a certain way or to be a certain way. Because body itself, as an organism, has self-healing properties. But these self-healing properties are not sort of spontaneous, random events which somehow happen in response to a situation. They are actually directed or commanded by your spiritual essence, which we can call spiritual body, because there is a difference between spiritual body, it's still a body, and between a soul. But we don't want to go to these esoteric talks today. All what I'm saying is, in order for a body in physical to be as it is, It has to be laid in a matrix of a spiritual. And this spiritual body is a sort of certain type of fields which are a replica of the physical body. So it's like you have a form and you fill it up with hot wax or something, you know, and you get an impression. Well, the physical body would have never developed to the body we expect to be if there was not a form of a spiritual body, which is much finer. And a spiritual body itself is always perfect. The imperfection happens on a physical side. And if you don't bring that awareness, you know, to a spiritual body, to make correction, you know, that defect would then manifest. But if you can control your spiritual body by being aware of your physical body, you can actually command a certain different state of quality or perfection, and you can not only heal your physical body, but in some ways you might even regenerate certain aspects of your body, and also perhaps even to reverse aging or do other things. You know, the reason why I'm saying it is there is lots of anecdotal evidence that people in extreme situations of inexplicable and unexpected horrors perhaps, who develop qualities in the body which normally are impossible to entertain. I have read and I've seen actually a videotape of, I think I probably mentioned it, of a man who was a grandpa, and he had an amputated arm for many, many years. And they'd been in a van, and his young grandson was climbing over the beam somewhere there, and he slipped, and he was ready to fall down, and the grandpa being nearby just grabbed him and put him to safety. But he had no arm, but arm materialized in that moment in its full strength and length, and he was able to save this guy's life. Now, this is not a simple case. There are other cases like that. And there is a book by Long John Nebel, who was a very famous American journalist and a talk show host, something like, what is this current one, you know, the most famous, you know, he has this talk show on weird and wonderful stuff, you know. I'll get his name, I'm losing my head on names. You know which one it is. But anyway, pardon me? Yeah, Art Bell, there you go. Thanks very much, yeah. So this guy, Long John Nebel, was much more than Art Bell. He was the king of the radio in late 50s, early 60s. And he had these wonderful personalities interviewed every day. And he wrote his memory. He was a hard-nosed skeptic. The guy would really sort of always challenge whatever it was. But he was straight shooter, and he would sort of write what he'd seen and talk about whatever he believed. And he described the case of a man who he was told has this power of regeneration. And he says, well, if he claims he can regenerate because he had sort of one leg missing, you know, and he would walk on crutches. And he says, if he has the power to regenerate, well, I'd like to interview him. I mean, what a big deal. So he got him on the radio. He says, and I was challenging him, and I thought it was a fluke, you know. He just definitely couldn't regenerate, you know. He get all this anecdotal evidence, but he still had just one leg, and crutches were on a couch or next to the chair he was sitting. And he said, you know, eventually I just lost my patience. And I said, I was done, you know. And so he said, I left my studio, and the guy just stood up and walked away. And when we looked, he left behind the crutches. So, you know, like he writes it there, you know, there are many cases of these. So our body physically is set in its way within the level of expectations we have as to what the body can do. We have these boundaries of this plausible sort of reality in which the body has its own place. But if somehow we can override that body through our mind, we can create that missing part probably the same way as doppelganger is created. You know, the term for a person who appears on two places at the same time. Literature is full of these phenomena, and some of them are very well recorded, you know. So if somebody can create oneself, duplicate oneself in a purpose of appearing somewhere, Teresa von Neumann was very famous for that. She was a lady who has stigmata, and she was a German lady, Teresa von Neumann, from Kreutzer, which is a town in Germany. There are books written about her, and she's the most documented case of a lady who have not eaten, I think I mentioned it, ever in her life, or she stopped eating like for 40 years. And it was well documented. The most stringent medical scientific committees would be with her, for example, locked for a whole month. She'd be always observed by somebody. And there was no evidence whatsoever that she would eat, drink, or that she would be losing weight. Actually, she was rather plump. I have a picture of her, and I would say, considering that that lady has not eaten pretty well all her adult life, she looks to me overweight, you know. And it's true. But she had this power because of that to be empath. She developed a purity. It seems to me that more we eat, more we feel our dense physical body, more we become a slave to that body as a spirit, and less freedom we have to roam. But because she stopped eating, she somehow reached that state where the body was sustaining itself purely by photosynthesis, by just breathing. And the term breatharian, you probably heard, refers to a people who actually are living in their bodies without eating. There is a whole movement started in Australia about 5 years ago. And actually there was a case which was like 2 years ago about one of these breatharians who tried to break into this habit and died in the process. And they sort of accused this woman who is a founder of it that it's a hoax and whatever, you know, as usual. But the fact is that there are people who don't need to eat. I have to say that doing the search, I came across at least 40 people who are documented as definitely not eating. The last case was about a few months ago about this guy who has a hole in his tongue. I don't know if you read about it. And he's in a was somewhere in a hospital. He was in India or somewhere there. And he just felt, you know, he doesn't need to eat at all because somehow, because of that hole in the tongue. But the point is that it baffles everybody, you know. So don't say that we all have to eat. Eating is a matter of habit, and you know it. More you eat, more you want to eat. If you ever try to starve yourself, you discover that the worst is first 3 days, and after that somehow your appetite disappears, you know. And you don't need to eat until you truly start burning your essential fatty tissues and all. Then you might be hungry, but you can go without food for a very, very long time. So we can control these things if we truly become a master, but we don't master anything virtually. We go with the flow, we expect certain things. We are born to die. That statement itself is a tremendous post-hypnotic suggestion. You have imposed on yourself the simple fact that you have to die. Every cell in your body have immediately understood what you mean. It's been blanketed by that strong belief, and there you go. But you know certain people who die on command. They would not die until certain events happen. They would hang on, everyone say, he should be long dead, whatever. And then the son arrives and mother dies, whatever. There are cases upon cases where people, we don't have that sensitivity. You see, we are, as a civilized people, as a people of the so-called natural world, we are losing the feeling, inner feeling of our own freedom of choice. And that manifests in so many ways. If you look into the history, people in the past, and Indians are known for it, you know, the native people, they could actually foresee their own death, and they could predict the time they would die. And they would actually put their affairs in order, call their families, you know, build a coffin, whatever, and then they just die. They had it all planned. Now, there is a famous book by a Frenchman, again, it's about cemeteries. It's the most famous work on survey of cemeteries in a sort of flow of time. He was studying all the major cemeteries in France, and he took a scope maybe of 200 centuries, and he looked on the people who've been buried there and tried to trace as many histories of these people, how they died, what was left behind, and he discovered a great number of people actually were able to predict their death. And I've been interested with that, because the part of our freedom is to be free to choose, let's say, when we die. If you remember that movie Moby Dick, you know, about this big whale, you know, and there is this Indian guy who is a whaler, and at a certain point he just refuses, you know, to partake, and he says, it's my time to die. He builds that coffin, and he definitely sort of lies into it and dies. All what I'm saying that the freedom is at the level where we can control everything, including how long we would be in our bodies, you know. But we have sort of made a consensus reality. We have agreed that, okay, freedom is fine, but security is better. Let's be secure in our bodies. Let's not be able to just get so upset with ourselves that we will ourselves to die. Let's remove that possibility. Let's make sure that we age gracefully and whatever. And it all happens, you know. It's not only a breeding which breeds certain strain of this or that, but it's the thinking. And as you command your thinking in a certain way, you put a stream in a different way, and the whole existence starts to reflect that way of thinking. Just a few days ago I was walking around and I asked myself, well, how clever is that nature? How everything is designed in such a way that it's run on autopilot. We don't even know why certain things are, but I said to myself, when I'm young, I feel good. I feel free. I don't feel my body. I feel I'm bulletproof. I can do anything. And if somebody told me at that moment that I have to die, I would kick vehemently. I would say, no way, I would do everything, because life is what I am full of. And this is good, because your physical body needs that. But as time goes and we become experienced in life, we realize that it's not what it happened to be. As we go through life, we realize that, well, okay, you feel one day, oh, I wish I wasn't around, I wish I died. But the point is that nature so cleverly designed aging process that introducing certain pain and aches and certain illnesses, it spoils our desire to live forever. It makes us to think less about life and more about that I wish it was all over and all. And so that transition from life to death is mitigated by removal of desire to live through the different dysfunctioning of a body. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Because if you are 70 or 80 and you are full of beans, like if you've been 20, nothing is wrong with you, well, dying would be terrible, wouldn't it? Nobody would like to. But once you reach that level, everything is sort of fixed in such a way that it's all happening. So I came to the conclusion that really sort of, even the illness is an integral part of our process of life. And it is necessary for a good transition. You are prepared, you are smoothed down, you are just worked out so you don't feel that shock. You know, you're actually looking towards it as a liberation, you know, freedom. So our thinking process and our behavior somehow are mingled, and as long as we develop this awareness of ourselves, and we know that body would definitely perish, but the body itself is never us, you know, the truly, you know, many times I saw, well, what is we have this, you know, talk about organic matter and all, and it's simple fact that it's alive, but I said to myself, well, until it dies, it's not, it's organic, and then, you know, just disappeared, and there's no more life in it, and it's become sort of inorganic in a sense. And I said to myself, well, really sort of, life, the coming theories coming now, that life is truly some sort of difference, you know. They don't have even word for it as energy. They just feel somehow that there is this unknown quantity in a universe which we can maybe call life, for a better word. And that life fills the universe. And that life wants to manifest itself. And the only way it can manifest itself is through physical. So it's insert, it's attached itself, it creates its own matrix to which the matter flows and pops, whatever it is. And as long as that life is in it, the thing is alive. And when that thing sort of gets out, things is dead. But it was never alive, it was only animated. You know, the illusion of being organic only came from the process of life being sort of involved. So I can see us as a part of that incredible cosmic force. It might be a universal soul, could be, we can talk about it for years, but that's a true freedom, you know. And when that thing sort of constrains itself into a matter, there is a price to be paid. You know, more matter you have around yourself, less clarity you have as to what it is all about. And when we talk about these people who went on these different fasts and all, it was to get clarity, to expand their sort of awareness. And in that awareness, there is a different level of freedom. It's the freedom, you know, of different order, because you are bulletproof. I mean, when we feel lack of freedom, when we seek for security, it's always for the body. Keep that body okay, you know. You don't want anything happen to the body. We say anything to us or to you, but it's the body. You cannot hurt the spirit. And that's why, for example, in this Indian text, Vedas and all, they speak about the illusion of being killed. There is no the killer, and there is not the one who was killed, because body ceased to function, but the life of the individual has been retained. And when we become aware of it, when we, through studies and through exercise, developing that faculty within us of awareness, your eyes which sees the physical, and your mind which sees the intellectual, would be enriched by this spiritual luminosity which comes from your soul, from your spirit, and everything would be different. The things which are now urgent and things which are important cease to have their meanings altogether. You would have different priorities, you would have a different considerations. And it was very great concern to me to what extent the people who are living with their worries, concerns, and constraints to their full expansion and because of responsibilities will actually carry that when they go on the other side and will be in a spirit only. And what is really interesting that in majority of cases, and I mean in great majority of cases, maybe 95% of cases, irrespective how well the person was connected in a physical life to the nearest and dearest, to the position and responsibility or influence he might have over the events and all, when he goes on the other side, it not matters anymore. He sees it differently, and he doesn't anymore dwell, because he realizes not only he is immortal, but his nearest and dearest, all what you be concerned about trials and tribulations they might go through physically. But, you know, sometimes physical constraint, as I was saying about it, can liberate you spiritually. You never know what sort of duties and responsibilities we have to do, because they have to be done, rather than we want to do them, would do to us as in our personal freedom. You know, more we sort of, as we say, as I'm saying, control our emotions, our desires, more we master this physical body, more we become liberated, more we become free in feeling and in sensing and in behaving, you know. We are individual discrete units now, because we are in a body, and I see you and you see me and all. But when you reach that spiritual awareness, you suddenly much closer to everybody. There is that brotherhood of unity which is eternal. And it's a sort of awareness and understanding of the differences in much clearer way without any constraint. As I said, the purpose of the greatest achievement is to live in such a way that when you go on the other side, you have clean conscience. And that means nothing will bug you, you'll be free. It's even in this world, the clean conscience is the greatest liberator. If you have something on your conscience, you know you're never free. You can have all the money you want, you can have all the power you want, but when you are at home and you are in a bed and you don't know it, the conscience kicks in, it starts working. So that doesn't matter what stage in life we are in. Let's burn out within everything which bugs us. Not necessarily physically, because you cannot avoid very frequently your rheumatic pains or whatever, but this is just a natural process of nature telling you, hey, your time is coming. Think about something more spiritual, something more long-lasting, something which would really stay with you when you go on the other side, because this body you leave behind. And it's better to be worn out and torn into smithereens than to leaving it completely good and still sort of. And so what we need to do is to be gentle towards ourselves internally, and it would reflect on outside towards everybody else. Internal freedom also would radiate to the outside, and you would be free relatively. But you have to understand we are all masks. When we're walking and we see and greet each other, we're greeting the bodies, because we don't really see who is looking through the eyes, what is there. And we have to sort of somehow understand that that's how it goes. In order for the spirit to be able to experience life, he has to have a vehicle. He has to have that body. Otherwise, that energy would never fulfill its own potential. We learn by experience. We cannot do it any other way. Your life lived is the only experience you would have, which you can carry in your memory and which shapes you spiritually. The quality are never physical. Quality of the individual are always spiritual. You might have a certain physical characteristics, body culture, whatever, you are a great sportsman and all, but this is only very perishing. This is very temporary. 5 years, 10 years, and it goes down a hill much faster. Sometimes, you know, to be a slob all life is probably better as far as a drastic change than to be a top-notch sportsman who eventually, you know, become a slob. You know, it happens to many. So I feel that one should never go into an extreme, because if you can be physically absolutely super specimen, but you know, if you are not intellectually and spiritually developed at the same time, then what you've got is monstrosity. Monstrosity is that one part of you is overdeveloped in relation to the remaining parts. You can be intellectual giant, but you can be still spiritual midget. And because of that intellectuality is monstrosity. You know, we always have to realize that it's the harmony which is all about, you know. Once you develop only one part of yourself, you know, then the other part suffers. You are not completed what was necessary to really grasp what it is all about. And so I always say, well, do not be afraid, you know, because there are levels of responsibilities we all have towards ourselves. One is the physical, as I said. To be free, you make sure that your body is healthy. To feel free, you make sure that you are intellectually sort of in a harmony with the way you live, the way you understand, and the way you interact. And to be free, then obviously you have to get it spiritually. And then all these other things, you know, might somehow be affected. But what's endure is that which is spiritual. That is you. And so if you feel in your soul that you are free, that you are, freedom is also non-attachment. You see, this is other thing, you know, you must, but it's a non-attachment of love, you know, that means you have universality. Once you start discriminating, you know, it affects your freedom too, you know. And so in your soul you start to feel and perceive things differently. And when you have that blanket awareness that we are all souls, and that there is a pristine essence in each soul, and that eventually each of us would reach the maximum, and that maximum is the same for everybody. That one day, doesn't matter how long it takes, we talk in eternity, we would be all perfect, you know. You start to see differently, you start to be much more sympathetic, you know, towards those who have missed the boat, and you try to help much more because you are not affected by their growth in your freedom. Very frequently we feel that if somebody is doing something better or have more negative impact on our own way of doing things, and we feel we've been badly had. And the point is that freedom is not what we normally think as a freedom. People say, give me a freedom or I die. Well, you give him a freedom and he lives in slavery anyway. You know, I've seen it so many times. People have this lofty talk, but there's a difference what you say and what you understand, what you're saying, and there is a difference between how it appears on outside and how it appears inside, and there is definitely a difference how it appears now in relation to 10, 15 years from now. Because what we thought was the greatest freedom, when you look back now, 20, 30 years on, you say, oh, well, I was not necessarily. In the contrary, you have certain situations when you feel you've been strapped and there was no freedom and all, and you realize that that was probably your happiest time in many ways. There was lots of freedom, which you benefited in years to come. All what I'm saying is that there is no such a thing as pursuit of happiness. There is no such a thing as sort of giving up your freedom. All what you're doing is you're resigning yourself to a status quo. And when you say, okay, fine, give me that security, you know, I feel, you might feel you feel free, but you don't feel free. What we have now is that people don't care anymore because we lose, you know, freedom is, like I said, it's a different dimension. It doesn't have color. Doesn't have a shape to it. It doesn't have even emotion to it. It only attaches itself to the emotions, and usually in a way where might be negative rather than positive. Free is like a clean window, crystal clear water. You see through it. It's there, but you don't see it. But when it interacts with something, you know, then it gets colored or whatever, and you can feel it in some ways. When you don't have it, you feel that something is missing. But when you have it, you might not even be aware of it. That's why people who are free usually are more ready to give up their freedom because there is no real awareness what they're giving up. On the other hand, those who are non-free might remember how it was before they felt free and might fight for it in some more vehement way, but it's usually physical. When you are in this world fighting for any cause, any freedom, anything like that, you're fighting losing battle in a way. You know, it would go out in a wash anyway, in 10, 15 years, whatever, makes no difference. The point is, the freedom comes from within. And to achieve that feeling now, that you are free within your heart, within your soul, you have to work on it systematically. One is try to control your emotions. So instead of mastering you, you master them. Try to develop a discipline so you can be a creator, because only with discipline you can create, because it takes focus, determination, energy, and if you don't have discipline to do certain things, for example, study a certain number of hours, you would never get there. So you have to develop certain personal qualities, but I'm talking all the spiritual, internal qualities, you know. I'm not saying that, you know, you have to be sort of physically strong or whatever, even if there are certain things in life, certain beings, certain people consider the most important on a physical level. And for them, the freedom is either to be physically free or physically restrained. So give me that white yonder, give me that bike and Route 66, whatever, and I'm free. And when you go into a jail, you think that's it, you know, freedom is gone. But there are cases of people in jail. They never felt freer than in jail, you know. When one was that famous guy was dying, Socrates or whatever, they had an execution ready for him, and jailer came for him. He just was laughing, said, "Catch me if you can." And he sort of expired by drinking that hemlock, whatever it was, before they could take it, because true essence was his soul. You know, he left behind body, which is not a defeat. That was a victory for him, because all what people can do is kill the body. And as I said, there is no killer and there is nobody to be killed. But we live in the material world, and because of this problem with dimensions, we cannot sense that truly, you know, there is more to us than meets the eye, and that, you know, it is the spiritual essence of us which counts. But it's been so neglected in our materialistic existence that we have lost even feeling for it. In the past, because of the simplicity of life, because of certain other considerations, people were much more introspective. They felt their inners much more, because they had a time, you know, they had simple lives, and certain issues are very clear, morally, spiritually, and all. Now everything is blended. We have killed because we started to believe so strongly that there is nothing except these physical bodies. We eliminate all these other factors like truthfulness, you know, moral, spiritual, otherwise, and we just simply feel it's right as long as everybody agrees. I had a meeting just recently, and during the meeting, the issue came. And one of the guys there said, yes, but if we do that, it will be morally wrong. And the guy who was the leader of that meeting, who was main in a decision-making position, said, well, the moral issues should not be considered whatsoever. Or something like that. Moral issues is not an issue and should not be considered. And I got shivered. I said, well, you see, these young guys, you know, they have not touched yet life in a way it should be. They don't have that feeling that sometimes if something is morally wrong, then it doesn't matter how else it is right, you know. The morally should override. But once we start throwing out the word morally wrong, you know, and just look on a profit or look on a sort of and justifies the means and all, we are building ourselves a cage. We are not becoming freer, because the so-called morally was at least something which held us, you know, within a reasonable level of civilized behavior, where there were other considerations. But once that goes out, what else protections we might have against the bureaucrats, against those who are in power? Because once you are in power, you don't sense you know, the same way as the one who is the recipient of that power, you know. And basically, the whole concept of freedom, to me, is to be aware that there are two lives we live simultaneously. One is the spiritual life, which we might not be aware of. And that spiritual life is in some ways affected by the natural life. And reason for it is because we filter our world through our senses. We hear, we smell, we touch, we see. And all that brings in certain informations, which then tune into electrical frequencies and go through the system and convey some impressions, which might be either corrupting or might be sort of improving. The soul itself, you know, would not know anything about the world if it existed within the body without these inputs. So when the person, for example, is born blind and mute and deaf, which are the cases like that, the soul is dormant. There is no real external life inputted, and the quality of that soul stays the same from the beginning to the end. It was unfulfilled potential. But when we start filtering, because it's all concept. We are not born with a concept of freedom, for example. You have to develop that by osmosis. People talking about freedom, which is exactly opposite to what you feel you are at a point when you feel that you are not free. But that's as close as you can really put a finger on it. So whenever you feel free, that's your freedom. My freedom might not necessarily be your freedom, because I read certain things, and when I have that opportunity, I feel extremely free. My mind is roaming and all, and I ignore discomfort and other things. You know, I would easily give up my vacation somewhere for, let's say, opportunity to get new information and all. Some people would be exactly opposite, you know. So the freedom varies, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you lived life which was free or whether you lived a life which was totally, you know, bondage. It really matters within you how free you really are and how much you have done for to be as free as you are, because it's a responsibility. If you don't work on yourself, if you, like I said, don't develop these qualities, because everything feeds on itself. There is desire for freedom comes stronger when you feel that you need that freedom and that you are not free. It's like desire for have a drink of water. You know, if you are not thirsty, you don't particularly consider that water of any value, and you don't necessarily make an issue out of it if it is not around. But only when you start thirst, you start to feel how important is that sip, that drink of water. And if you know that the water would not be able to be provided, then you know that that's your debt, and you would do anything if you want to live together. And so it is with freedom. You know, if you have it, you don't even know what it is. But when you start losing it, you realize you need it, and if you lose it completely, then obviously that might be end of it. So, but it's very individual. You might die for certain cause, while the other would just not even blink. You know, you might pay tremendous price for certain freedom, physically, spiritually, even mentally, and other would say, well, it was crazy, it was not worth it. You know, it's just we all have our own values, and these values come through the inner growth. That's why I feel that if we are materially inclined, the value of this world is everything of value. Money, power, wealth, whatever, physical opportunities, fame. All these things, you know, might be sort of liberating to many people, might have a tremendous value, but really, at the end of the day, they all would be left behind. The freedom comes in knowing that this world, irrespective whether we suffer in it, whether we feel free or no, because, you know, you can feel extremely free in your decision to renounce freedom, and it would liberate you to its extreme, and would give you awareness of that freedom far more than before you made that decision. For example, sense of responsibility is so well developed in a spiritual sort of essence that when, let's say, somebody needs care, let's say the daughter or the son would say, okay, fine, I just give up my freedom. I give up my career, I give up whatever, and I would stay with that person till that person makes transition, and dedicate, tie up with that person. It's a tremendous sacrifice from the level as we see it in a materialistic approach from a natural world. But maybe that person finally feel liberated. Finally, there was a free decision which opened some channels within, and one feels much freer giving somebody the part of one's freedom than denying it, you know. So it's a very complex issue where we have to always keep in mind that since we don't think about things, we do truly not understand why certain things happen and what we do, why we do it. It's only after the fact we tend to justify our behaviors and why we did certain this way and why we did certain other way. And it's quite clear because it's a 20/20 hindsight vision. But the point is that to really reason is very different, and it must not be influenced by anything except pure reason. And unfortunately, when we think, we are not reasoning. We are a victim of our lack of freedom because we are influenced by so many things which might not be even, we might not be even aware because it's in our memory somewhere there. It's from childhood, the way we saw certain things were done. And we think it's natural and we can reason it and justify it. But the point is that when I'm talking about freedom, I'm not talking on a personal level of individual emotional state, because like I've said, freedom which can be given can be taken away. We're talking of freedom which is sort of there because we have achieved certain level of quality as a human beings, which is totally in line with our way of thinking and with our inclinations. And because of that, there is no sort of crunch, there is no ripple, and we feel free. When something obviously comes to that and try to spoil it, then we might be threatened. But a truly spiritual person would not be whatsoever concerned with it for a simple reason that he knows that spirituality is above the physical. And that physical might appear as rather difficult going. That all kind of things might have certain consequences, but they come and go because anything which is a beginning would have an end. On a spiritual level, you are not bothered by these things. You truly are not. You won't know it until you get to that level, or until you experience it in a life you live through a certain way of evolution, because you have to work. There is, no pain, no gain. You have to simply give up something of yourself in order that you get something back in return. And that something of yourself is to usually go through a pain, so to speak, whether it's spiritual or whether it's mental or whether it's physical. Because, in order to progress, to lift yourself up, you have to give something away. You have to put something into that which would not be easy, but be worth it. As they say, to slide is very easy. To climb up is much more difficult. And to climb up, whether it's physically or spiritually or academically and all, means you have to pay the price. You cannot just have it, given to you without effort, because effort is the thing which transforms, not the final end. It's the process. And when we are on this quest, if we give up to everything which happens, and say, oh, well, I don't care, and let's sort of whatever, let it all hang out and all, that's just fine. That's sort of killing the opportunities. It's a noise which prevents you truly to hear your inner self. And maybe one day you discover that your body cannot anymore take this partying, that your mind is not as sharp as it used to be, and that nobody cares very much about your opinions because you reach a certain age and there are much smarter kids who knows it all, and suddenly you realize that somehow something is missing. You lived all these years, 50, 60, whatever, and at the end of the day you say, but what is there for me? I mean, all the things I have gathered, all the things I have put together, I thought I was free, but really I wasn't free because I was doing all the things. They took my energy here. You can go in this way, car, $20,000. Well, given my present salary, you would say in a net, if I save, I have to work probably 2 years. So instead of saying it's $20,000, I might say, this is 2 years of my life, you know, and then I go to the house and say, that's 15 years of my life. And because that's exactly, you had no freedom. You had to work in order to get that things, you know, and that things really lasts because it's there, you can do to it, anything is there, and you go and the thing still would be probably there or whatever, but, you know, you realize that you sold your life very cheaply and that you had no time for yourself and to feel yourself, because when you start feeling yourself, the freedom becomes self-evident, but you don't like because you are afraid sometimes, you know. And anyway, it's all kind of stuff, you know, we can talk about in this relationship, especially now with after 9/11 and all. You realize how everything is unfolding because of lack of moral and ethical standards, lack of cohesiveness within civilization, based on a certain spiritual criteria. Anything goes. Every lie is as good as anything, you know. If it fits the purpose, who cares? In the past, you know, the last thing you would expect is that your head of state or your government would brazenly lie. Now it's normal. Everybody knows they're lying and nobody blinks. And so it filters itself down. We're living in a true cesspool where things cannot get better. They can get only worse. Because I was saying, in order to get better, you have to climb up. And it's much more difficult to climb up than to slide down. And we are sliding. We are on a big life slide, water slide of some kind, and God knows how we all end. But it would not be liberating, because with all this so-called power trip, which is all what, you know, government can do, desire to control. To control, by definition, means to take away something from, you know, to streamline in a specific way. So if we're talking about controlling people, we are saying, well, we are talking about taking freedom of choice away. We are telling people that's the way you have to behave. That's how the life is. And so slowly but surely, you know, we might not be aware of it, but we are in that cooking pot and being cooked, and one day might be too late, but that's only physical. On a spiritual level, that should not at all filter to you. When you are aware of it, when you realize that people do what people do because they have bodies to do it to other bodies, you know, that's just fine. But on a spiritual level, you can still say, oh, well, I feel like that guy from that prison I was telling you, you know, John somebody, who just went inside and all the straitjackets and all the pains of the world were gone, and he was in a world he just was totally free and liberated. And that's basically what happens. But it's your conscience. If your conscience is spiritual, you see, you cannot say, well, you know, I would have no conscience. In the contrary, where you die, and be much clearer than now. You can suppress it now. You can sort of hide your conscience by activities and behaviors which would not remind you of something. But the clarity of your memory becomes self-evident when you are in a sort of etheric body alone, and you'll be quite surprised how it comes back to bite you, because there is no such a thing as a sort of, as we say, free lunch. You might have it good now, you might be very free, so to speak, today, but your freedom was actually a slavery, which you would realize because you missed so many opportunities, you know. Freedom sometimes leads to lackadaisical behavior. You know, I always praise the Lord, saying to myself, thanks God I am not a millionaire, because I would not be able to study and read, because if you have so much money to be free, I'll be on a cruise here, cruise there, having party, buying things, and whatever games, you know, and I would be stupid. I'll be happy, perhaps, because I would have this freedom of a physical body. But spiritually, I would not grow. I rather prefer to sit at home and read a book, because it's a very cheap and very effective way of entertaining, as opposed to actually caring just for a body and for the whims of emotions, because discipline comes from something you have to do because you feel it needs to be done. And sometimes I don't like to read, but I feel, well, if I don't get this information, I won't be able to think and all. So we have to discipline ourselves, and usually it's a spiritual benefit rather than physical benefits we should be thinking. Cleverness in the things of this world might give you a freedom for a very short time, but might make you total slave because you don't have this, what it takes to understand what you truly are. And like I said, the habits die hard, and if you don't break them now, you might have to deal with them later. And like I said, there are many cases of spirits who, because of neglecting that aspect, have to deal with it, and usually the help is of different order than we can have today, because we are all different people. Some are higher spiritual, some are lower. We can help each other. Once you get to that level where everything is equal, because like things like, it's like a gravity, so the rascals would be at the level called rascals, you know, and neither one of them would know how to get better because they never land up. And so there you are stuck, you know. Those who are better are higher up, and they cannot really go because of the gravity down to help. So it's very hard to self-invent yourself, to pull yourself by your own bootstraps, and that's why I feel the body gives the spirit opportunities to linger and to learn. There might be differences in centuries between us, you know. And you know, sometimes you meet someone and say, God, what a Groman, you know, what kind of person is that, where he came from, you know, because you know that spiritually, you know, ethically and morally, you know, it's just totally incomprehensible to you. And this is the thing, that reality is illusory, is very relative. We try, because of the so-called social behavior, to streamline things, to be sort of all alike, to be cut from the same cloth, the same cookie cutter, because it's easy. When you have the same qualities like the other fellow, then you are all mediocre. There is no really worry, you can be replaced, you know. And for those who seek power, that's what they're looking in people, you know, sameness, the complete replaceability. The number would do, name is just a old-fashioned way of identification, you know, and all. But once we sort of become free, we become more individuals. And because each freedom is different from others' perception of freedom, that's where the things come. Your creativity comes from difference, not from the sameness. If we are the same, nobody is different, nothing new would happen. The freedom to do things is something which comes from the perception of your own strengths and capabilities, you know. If you are an artist, you know, you need to have that opportunity, let's say, to manifest that artistic aspect of you through the freedom given to you to manifest. If you are expert in anything, if you are anything, you need the freedom to live your life to its full capacity. We don't know what it is to live to full capacity, but you know it retrospectively. When you look back on your life, you assess your life, and you know whether you lived your life the way you thought you would be living your life or not. Your self-recognition is a reflection which is based on a past history, on a past history which you have accumulated through this life in your memory. And you know, by comparing the time, you're comparing with everything what was before. And so we always should, as I've said, in order to be on a track, we should never forget our inner self. We should always check ourselves as to what is in us and what we represent in that given point. Do I really like the last 6 months I have lived? Have I really achieved what I thought I would achieve? Or was it just a frustration? Everything was out of control. I have not felt free. I have not felt good, you know. And what can I do about it, you know? If you can do that in segments, usually you can have a control. If you let things go for a long time, you might never regain that control. So those who are prone to sleep sometimes, you know, until you develop the complete habit, you know, you should put it on your calendar and say, okay, every first Monday in a month, you know, I'll spend 20 minutes or half an hour just thinking about the last half a year. Not in a major accomplishment as far as, you know, I built so many widgets and I drove so many kilometers and I ate so many kilos of sausage, but rather, you know, have I really harmed some people during that 6 months? Have I had the opportunity to bring forth certain qualities which are within me and I have not done so? The good people should be always noticed, you know, so other can see that and can imitate. That's the beauty of it, that human beings, as I said, they are not very free. We tend to imitate. Virtually everything we imitate. And usually when it is good, we tend to imitate good. And so you don't need to speak, you don't need to say anything, you know. We know who we're dealing with, and we imitate that what we like, and we obviously would avoid that what we don't like, but we should always look on ourselves. And if you do that, you discover that you catch very quickly some trait within you, which you know is a weakness. It's a sort of a corrosive characteristic, something which undermines your potentials, undermines the feeling of wellness and goodness, and makes you sort of dissatisfied and brings on, let's say, certain set of behavior which you would not like. So, you know, like I said, usually fear seeks security. If you have not enough information, if you have a wrong information, then you do not know the truth. And therefore you have a fear. And because you have a fear, you try to deal with the fear through certain measures, which we call security measures. If you are seeker for the truth, and I mean spiritual truth, divine truth, then there is nothing to fear. And if there is nothing to fear, there is no need for security, because you are free. If you know truly the truth, you want to live that truth. You don't care about anything else than the truth. But until you live in an illusion of what is truth, you live in an error. Can be an opinion, could be anything. And that would create doubts. And when the doubts comes, all kind of other things takes place. So in some ways, you know, we should try to clarify during our life, you know, what we really know, not what we believe in, because belief is, you know, something which comes and goes, and it's been usually brought to your attention, sometimes externally. And they are good in many ways, because sometimes beliefs turn out to be right things, but we as a reasonable beings, we should always try to go beyond belief. Belief can be changed. The truth is eternal. Once you come to that conclusion through your soul, you feel it in every molecule, every atom of your body, which goes beyond. You know rather than I believe. You say, I know. And when you reach that stage, in whatever, that becomes pretty well solid, and you can hang on that all your life, and you'll be fine. There's not too many truths. There's one big truth, and you know, when you realize that, you know, you realize you got home. Everything else is just sort of drifting around, killing the time, as we say. But you know, we might believe certain things, but the reality is reality. And if we believe wrongly, well, we have to pay the price. There is no such a thing as a credit for ignorance. When you go on sort of spiritual time, you know, on the other side, you cannot use any excuse. Your record is what you've been and what you have done. And you have to take it from there. But the whole concept of freedom is truly an internal issue. They can put you into a jail, they can tell you to sign every day before you get out of your house, they can put a chips into you, they can control you remotely, whatever. It makes no difference. If you internally develop that awareness that life is not all that, and this is just something they do to your body, but you as a spiritual being can bypass that altogether, retrieve yourself to the world, which is of different quality, ethical and moral achievement or complexity, then you'll be fine. You know, important is that everything boils down. More advanced you become, more you start understanding yourself, more you realize that life is really very simple, and that if you have in your heart, you know, that love, you have also wisdom. And if you know that you have done your best, and you're going to be ashamed of what you have done, you know, you really live to the best and you've done great for your own future. On the other hand, you know, it doesn't mean that you might have lived all your life wrong. As long as you repent, as long as you have that desire within you for freedom from the evils, like for example, somebody is alcoholic, drug addict, the weak in a body, but in a spirit, he is liberated because he is ashamed of his behavior. He is ashamed of that he cannot overcome these things, you know. He truly disassociates spiritually from the physical behavior, or maybe sort of intellectual travesty, whatever. If he truly does it, you know, then it's your spirit which counts, not what you have done. So when you get pure within, you know, you continue to be pure. When you break, you know, that connection, because sometimes, you know, you might not know certain things and you do them under the illusion or delusion or a certain belief. And you might get into it so much that you've been so corrupted physically that you cannot pretty well undo what you have done. And you feel trapped because you feel that, you know, you cannot be free anymore, your unconscious is weighing on you and all. But if you can sort of find within yourself that awareness and a true repentance through the soul recognition of the ills and wrongness, you become transformed. And that's what counts. It's not sometimes what we achieve which counts, but the direction we're going to achieve. You know, you might die, for example, before you have reached certain things, but you are victorious in your soul, in your heart. You're already there. It's just that there is a time between physically actually moving through space to getting to the point and to be there already in your heart. And so as we are sort of becoming more aware of that fact, that it is not what is in our head as much as what is in our heart, which determines the freedom, you would realize that, you know, you have to always measure it in that way. I say, well, okay, the kid has a different perception of freedom, infirm individual has a different perception of freedom, the old person, educated, different cultures, everything changed. But in our hearts, we are all the same. And we understand through our hearts. And the understanding is very simple. It's either love or fear, you know. And we either love people or we fear people. If we fear people, we need securities. Giving up lots of, if we love people. What else to be said? Anyway, I think we've done good on time, you know. I have about 5-10 minutes at the most for any question. If you have any, you know, please shoot. Otherwise, you know, yes?
I came late to cut your portion of spirit and freedom. Do you feel that there is a separation of the body from the spirit that allows for ultimate freedom?
Well, ultimate freedom is already...
If that's attainable.
Yes, it is. You know, ultimate freedom is freedom of a spirit. Since spirit is eternal, and spirit is not something which will be born after we die, it's already us. Separation of a body should not affect that feeling of spiritual freedom we have developed, because body itself has no feeling of anything. It's like the car. You know, I mean, drive and there is a driver, you know, but that's as far as it goes. I would say that if we understand ourselves as spiritual beings, then there is a possibility of this ultimate freedom. If we understand ourselves only as a natural beings, you know, without any spiritual component, simply just bunch of cells, you know, interacting, then obviously the whole issue of freedom is very different. And then it's very relative, and it's sort of determined by forces outside of your perception.
The question comes, is spirit already within you at birth or conception, and then exits you at death, and you carry it with you physically within you, and then you're liberated on both sides?
Well, the spirit is something which, theoretically, when you look, there is a difference between the spirit and a soul. You know, we have not touched on a soul because we somehow feel the spirit and soul, it's exactly the same, but it is not. To me, the spirit is just the manifestation of a soul in one of its, I would not call it reincarnations, but one of its potentials, you know. So eventually, you know, the spirit itself would be absorbed to the soul to complete the awareness of a soul with all the memories and all obviously intact. If the spirit itself fails in a process and becomes, you know, damaged, so to speak, then it would never actually get connected with the soul. But the point is that I would see our lives as a sort of endless journey, sometimes passing through zones, or we can call it different frequencies, which makes us more dense and visible. It's like a Halley's Comet. We know that exists, but we don't see it now. But we can calculate how long it takes before it appears and how long stays in our atmosphere before it disappears. During that time when it enters, to the time it disappears, become visible, become alive. But cease to be, we don't say, well, it's dead. Life is the same, you know. Life continues. At a certain point, the matter becomes sufficiently appropriate to envelop that spirit, and it's called life. Until again, that spirit leaves that matter, and it's become a dead. As somebody said, you know, born 1900, died 1950, that is nothing. It's that place, you know, between, you know, 19 and 1950, which is the life, and it's the numbers, you know. I know what you're trying to say. That would take a really little bit more time because we are running 5 minutes or whatever at the most. And also, there are certain concepts which we have to first clarify, like, for example, you mentioned reincarnations and all that stuff, you know, before we start understanding what we're dealing with. But overall, yes, you can achieve personal freedom in this life by being aware internally, spiritually, that you are eternal being and what freedom really means, rather than freedom being titillation of your senses or immediate gratification of certain desires. Actually, it is in the contrary, you know. Okay? Okay, Neil.
Yeah, can you just say just a little bit more about the holographic idea of the heart and the mind? You can say a little bit about that.
Well, there is a sort of a trend now in sort of neurology and study of the brain to indicate that we don't know really very much about the brain because we always study the physical matter, and we tend to sort of correlate only the physical things and places within the brain, and with different gadgets we have out in disposal, electronic measurements and all, we can sort of extract some informations, but there are some much higher concepts which are coming now forth, which indicate that brain itself is not only that which is physical, but brain is a holographic concept which stretches as far as heart, and that heart is actually part of the brain, and that certain higher qualities, like the spiritual qualities and moral and ethical considerations, might be more embodied in a heart rather than in a physical matter itself. And it's just, there is a book, Biological Transcendence, by a guy called Pierce, and he writes about it very eloquently. I think the New Age bookstore have the copy there. So if you want to really know more about it, you know, it's a great book to read. It takes time because it's a fact-based and brings you to think about different parts of brain and all, but it's worthwhile because it teaches you why we are what we are and how we came to about it. How come that some people with the same brain have never achieved anything and other people with the same brain achieve everything? And what makes that difference? How come child might be handicapped in some ways, you know, and other child might be just really a high flyer? How this brain can be trained or developed, because they speak about the critical points in brain development. And if you miss that point, which I've been saying a long time, you cannot anymore develop. So it's very critical how parents, for example, or teachers deal with kids, knowing that they are going through these stages, and if they miss that stage, It's like learning foreign language, you know. If you are a kid, you grasp it very quickly, and you leave it until you are 60, and you probably will never learn it, you know. So it's all kind of stuff. But it also shows that we are not developed to its full capacity in the early ages, as we believed, but that spiritual and moral and ethical development is still continuing, and you might be in your 30s and you might be still developing some qualities, and that's through that heart.